This is the reporting session and will be followed by the closing session. We will have 5 rapporteurs. We'll be giving everyone 10 minutes, except for Ms. Zhao, because she will be reporting on 2 tracks. The first stream was plenary sessions and health stream, to be reported by the Vice President of Human Resources and Administration, Projects International in Bahrain. Please join me to welcome Dr. Rafi Nakhla.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. Well, I have the duty in 10 minutes to summarize what we have attended in the plenaries as well as the health stream. My comment that 2 years ago we were talking about the genome and the post-genomic era, and I said that today we are going beyond the genomic era. We had 3 topics. We had topics addressing healthcare, advances in healthcare, then a particular address on vaccines, and finally we had biorobotics. One major issue has emerged during all lectures on the health care, which is we have done a sequencing, we have identified genes, but we have discovered that the systems are still too complex for us to understand. What was expected to be a breakthrough have opened new windows for new questions, and still these questions need to be answered. So complexity in the reaction, complexity in the systems, in the biological systems, still stands as an issue. I took this from a slide presented by one of the presenters just as an illustration of complexity. Starting by the healthcare, we were talking about poor health is not a choice. Nobody chooses to be ill. Nobody selects on his own to become ill. So everybody has the right for good health. The current systems now are under pressure, and these pressures are outstripping the systems from their ability to meet the demand. And this pressure is created by the demographic changes. It is created also by the increased expectations of the patients and by the economic circumstances. And this gives the rise to the need for a system that can be used to judge and make decisions on what would be the priorities in establishing healthcare system. The problem is that we have research and we have patients, and not always the research priorities match the patient requirements. In many disease areas, the research focuses on one aspect of the disease while the patient requires something else, and this requires that we bring research and the patient support together to have a common view. Building on the genome system, there was many initiatives in Denmark, in Norway. Among them is the Norwegian Cancer Genomic Consortium, which attempts to analyze the genomes of cancer cells and feeding it into a data bank, whether these are coming from cancer cells or from blood of infected patients, and creating a data bank. The process was considered to be a straightforward process. However, it broke up with this comment coming from the past president of the European Association of Cancer Research. Cancer is like a puzzle of 3,000 pieces that suddenly explodes into 3 billion, which again focuses on the issue of how complex things are. The deeper we go, the more complex we discover it. I quote Professor Werner that he said that human health is a precious plant that must be nurtured, cultivated, and evolved. So complexity again comes to the play. When a question was raised why people react to an infection in different ways. The case was brought to our attention of Streptococcus pyogenes that can in some patients do nothing, while in other patients could evolve into flesh-eating deadly disease. And the conclusion was that there are factors within the host that dictate the response to the infection, and disease is still complex. It's a complex interaction between genetic, environmental systems. So still we need to go further and understand it. On the issue of the vaccines, vaccines are a success story because vaccines have saved 2.5 million deaths annually of children. The crippling disease of polio is almost eradicated except in 3 countries. India has been declared polio-free recently. Only Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan are still not declared free. However, there are few new vaccines in the pipeline. And according to one of the lectures, there is a bottleneck for vaccine development. It is the human trial. It is using large cohorts of humans to test the vaccine, which is phase 3 in any drug assessment. The problem of vaccines is that you cannot correlate a mouse model to humans. What you get as a response in mouse cannot be extrapolated into humans, and you need to test on humans. Again, the complexity comes here into play. Vaccines are not anymore an antigen system, but it needs to be discussed within the scope of the whole immunological system. That's why I'm, in my opinion, until now, trying to emulate the antigen-antibody systems that were successful before in some of the vaccines in diseases like TB, in diseases like hepatitis C, in diseases like AIDS and malaria. The system is more complex, and it's not as straightforward as it would be with measles, mumps, and polio. The conclusion is that complexity has been largely underestimated in biology. One problem that affects also the vaccines is the inequity of distribution. Among different populations, it still prevails. There are populations that are widely covered, there are populations that are undercovered. There has been also evidence of disparity within the same country, depending on the area where people live. And a good example of the vaccine business volume is UNICEF, which is a major buyer in vaccines. The data that were presented to us say that UNICEF's bought last year what was worth $1 billion in vaccines, the equivalent of 2.4 or 2.5 billion doses that were shipped in 2,105 shipments. According to the speaker, that represents a shipment every working hour. It's a huge logistic operation. The whole issue about vaccination is logistics. It's how to transfer the vaccine from its source until the final person that needs to be vaccinated. Because of the problems of logistics and because of the problems of reach, there are still 2 million deaths that can be prevented. They are not prevented because the vaccine does not reach these people. Finally, there was an intervention by WIPO, and WIPO has launched 2 initiatives to bring down the issue of intellectual property. So by bringing people together through a common platform, an electronic platform, creating a database of patents, creating a database of available researchers, and making it available for participants on both sides, they are trying to lower down the burden of intellectual property. The first one is called WIPO Research. They have an open platform database that is built and shared and has the available IP assets, including the compounds, the regulatory data, the know-how, the material and patents, and it is based on minimum cost. Another initiative is the initiative using the essential drug lists issued by the WHO, putting the essential drug list online, and again, seeking to see which are the drugs that are out of patent and which are the drugs that are still under patent. It is estimated that out of the 400 drugs in the essential drug list, only 60 are still under patent and the remaining are out of patent. The last session I had to report on was the biorobotics, which was a very impressive session. We have seen several examples. Robots used as war machines, linking robots to human brains, robots mimicking humans, and robots mimicking nature. Personally, I was shocked about the issue of robots in war. And according to the presentation, it brings a lot of questions associated with this application. My watch says that my 10 minutes are run, but I need just one more minute. Several questions need to be answered, several issues need to be answered. How much authority are we going to allow to the robot to take a decision on its own? There are issues that need to be resolved before going into that. The other example was linking robots to human brain, and this is a breakthrough because it might help in resolving some mobility problems to crippled people. People who cannot, who have lost an arm, who have lost a leg, who are paralyzed, can still send signals and make robots work for them. Mimicking humans is another example. We have seen it 2 years ago in BioVisionAlexandria in 2010. And again, they are types of robots that are going to interact with human beings, possibly serving them, possibly providing them with help and assistance. The last one was mimicking nature. It's looking at biological systems and trying to get what these biological systems are doing, trying to get their inherent intelligence and applying it to a robotic model to do a particular job. And thank you very much.
The next reporter will report on TWAS, BioVisionAlexandria, next 2012 and Science Celebration Day. The founder of Kensho Thinking, Dr. Doi Kwan. Please join me to welcome her.
Thank you. I will report on 2 tracks. One is the TWAS BVA Next, which was held over the weekend. Its theme was Innovation from Theory to Practice. This is a forum and conference for young researchers who came from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. It consisted of 4 sessions going over reviewing the current state of affairs, future trends, responsibilities and obligations of the scientists, how to cultivate an environment that would enable to move forward, and examples of case studies of situations of what worked and what didn't work. Some common themes came across. One is innovation requires emphasis on application and use. The technology by itself is not innovation. Innovation is a continuous process. You need to stay curious and continue to ask questions, and you need to learn to think critically and independently. Additional common themes, another was that it requires partnership between university, industry, and government. Each has an important role to play, and they must work together in interdependent ways. And the university requires training talent, not just the skills, but also the mindset of risk-taking, tolerance, foresight, fairness, ethics. Also requires the training in curiosity and critical thinking. Additionally, it requires developing the ability and the willingness and the obligation to speak up. Universities are also responsible for keeping an eye on the trends to be able to capture them and anticipate what needs to be worked on next, and looking in terms of the problems that need to be solved, focusing on solutions and not just simply looking at problems, and not simply doing research independent of the needs of society. Industry is important and necessary because it's what actually gets the technology commercialized or the research commercialized, it needs to be more receptive to reaching out and interacting with universities. It needs to bring the market perspective so that so university scientists understand the needs and the priorities of customers and markets, and it needs to grow local companies so that you can build an environment that's more dynamic. Government's role is to be part of the policy and the strategies so that innovation can occur and can thrive. It's needed to invest in the people and the research and infrastructure, but its role is to facilitate, not to dictate, and that's an important point. Additional common themes is that there's not one roadmap, but there's some parameters and some tools that need to be considered. An important point is scientists need to understand and talk the language of business and industry. All right, the priorities are different, the perspectives are different. Given that business is basically in the business to make money, you have to be able to explain what the value is to them and why they should use and adopt and commercialize your technology. It's important to make use of all the wonderful new communications technology to reach out, to connect, to collaborate, and to acquire more information and knowledge. It's important to collaborate in teams across functions and disciplines. You cannot do science in a vacuum, and you can no longer, because of the growing understanding of the complexity of biology and life, to simply study in your particular area without looking at other disciplines, not just in science, but also in the humanities and social sciences as well. The responsibility includes taking the initiative to make things happen, not just wait for things to come to you. Many of the discussion questions had to do with, well, what can be done? And the question should be, what can I do to help make things happen? It's important to recruit the best people and keep them challenged, to work to keep them. If you commercialize, you need to have a great product and passion for that product that's useful to a market. In order to accomplish that, you need to stay close to the customer and understand the needs and the wants and how it would be used. Another theme that was important that came up was you need to keep trying and trying again. There's no roadmap, there's no formula for how one commercializes or succeeds. Many technologies and many efforts to commercialize science and technology will not succeed. But what you need to do is understand and learn from what didn't work and not think of it as failure. So you have to learn to take those risks to keep trying, even though maybe the first or the second or the fifth time does not succeed. And finally, scientists need to keep thinking big and keeping an eye on the big picture, while at the same time paying attention to the details. The next track I will report on is Celebration of Science. This included tracks of the plenary sessions of A Quest for the Better Future, which was the Nobel session, The Many Wonders of Science, The New Life Sciences, Access to Food, and Science and Policy Serving Society. Some of the highlights were that there was actually innovation in the presentation mechanism. We had not only in the Nobel session in-person presentations, but also interactive video conferencing, as well as more traditional taped presentations. The potential to use new advances in science to improve health, nutrition, water, various benefits to society have been growing dramatically. Advances in new research tools have dramatically increased our ability to observe and to measure, which is what allows us to apply better. And yet we need more new tools of even greater scope to be able to probe deeper. There's been a new appreciation of the complexity of life, which Dr. Rafif also mentioned in his track. We're finding that things are a lot more complicated than we thought, and our current tools just simply are not capable of understanding that. But there are layers of information and emergent properties when you start looking at the data and the information at different levels. Systems approaches offer some context, greater context, to look at these interrelationships of how the metadata work together or are related, and perhaps to help sort through some of the complexity. But there's still a long way to go, even with the systems approach. And we were also offered a variety of products, programs, and policy examples of how science has been used to benefit. Some common themes, again, among all of these tracks on celebrating science is we're moving from data to turning it into information, and we need to continue to turn it into knowledge. There's a correlation between economic growth with supporting education and adoption of science and technology, and the lack of economic growth when there's a withdrawal of such support. As I said before, there was a reinforcement of the theme from the BVA Next of science cannot be done in a vacuum. It has to be done in the context of the interrelationships, science and technology, business and society. So this includes the issues of the policies, issues of the resources, the issues of the humanities, arts and culture, as well as the social sciences. We had some very interesting presentations on the economics, especially of the issues of food. Its importance of evidence-making decisions at all levels. We have to use a scientific approach of looking at what the data, what is the evidence, and then deciding based on that how to move forward, and not simply based on because we feel something might be a case or believe something might be. We need to support it with data. We must also continue to encourage risk-taking and reduce the stigma of failure. If we're too cautious in our research, it's very difficult to learn something new that might be of benefit. Additional common concerns are that we need societal support for research, both short-term and long-term. We need to educate our people, the public, the students, from the very youngest ages in science and in critical thinking. In order to do that, we need to make it fun and understandable in the context of society. It cannot, again, be done by rote or in a vacuum, just simply raw facts or boring information. We need to communicate the benefits of society and technology, of science and technology to society, because while there's interest, there's not understanding, so that they can get a better view of how science is benefiting the public. That's understanding the differences in how the university, industry, government, society, perspectives and priorities, and communicate accordingly. But scientists need to take ownership to actually initiate and to take action with integrity. The sports apparel company Nike used to have a theme, just do it, and that's what we need to do as scientists. We need to be creative in finding resources to help ourselves. We need to educate not just the students, but also the government and the general public, as well as industry. We need to reach out to interact with diverse fields, not just in science, but in all areas, to stimulate critical thinking, learning, and knowledge building. And we need to be rigorous in learning and assessing based on evidence. For me, the take-home message is that it is imperative to keep learning and testing, to keep acquiring knowledge with rigor, and to keep trying to productively apply that knowledge that we have acquired, so that today's young people, who will be tomorrow's leaders, will be in a position to solve the problems of the future. Thank you.
I would like to remind everyone, I think you have a sheet in your bag you received about evaluating the conference, right? Was it there? Right? Was it there? Right? Everyone has one? So please complete it and give it to the information desk downstairs before you leave, please. Just to make the next conference better than this one. Reporting on food and agricultural stream from the Faculty of Agriculture, Alexandria University, Egypt, Dr. Sami Rakshi. Please join me to welcome him up.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be speaking to you this evening. I'll do my best to summarize the food and agriculture sessions. The first session had a title of Millennium Development Goal number 1 is the roadmap to agricultural development. The first goal was part of 8 goals that have been identified by International Organization for Development throughout the world. Here are they, and the first one is to end poverty and hunger. Some countries achieved progress in success in achieving this goal to end poverty and hunger by 2015. Others are not that advanced and they're having still problems to achieve this goal. If we go through the reasons of hunger, we can get main causes like poor harvest and low yield, high food prices and economic crisis that affects the hunger, increases levels of hunger. Success of agricultural development was a key factor in progress in fighting poverty and hunger. If we go through the factors that were discussed related to success of agricultural development, we can see that in these countries that succeeded, they have a better amount of water for irrigation. Under such circumstances like climate change, less rainfall and higher temperatures that affect the agricultural production. Other factors like development and transfer of new technologies, where it is useful for farmers and agricultural production sector to use the new technologies like GIS, bioeconomic modeling, NFT, and hydroponics. Also, another factor is the debt relief programs, where some countries benefited from that and they achieved better level of the goal number 1. Investment into the agricultural production and effective development programs helped on agricultural production. Population proportion under poverty in such countries were a main factor. Support to agricultural smallholders benefited the agricultural production. Moving to requirements of advanced agricultural production, we can see that it depends on several factors. The first one is the genetic improvement of crops through conventional breeding and biotechnology. Moving to improved agricultural practices depends on seeing plants as a whole system rather than just an organism planted in the soil. Also, agroecological studies and understanding soil biology is a main contribution to advance agricultural production. Dr. Norman Uphoff presented the SRI system, which is the system of rice intensification. And he mentioned a very nice example when combining the SRI system with new hybrids of rice. They achieved very high productivity, which reached 22.4 tons per hectare versus like the conventional 2.4 or so. Tasks need to achieve the conservation agriculture, because conventional agriculture causes many problems in agriculture production. In this session, it was highlighted the conservation agriculture, where we need to have minimum soil disturbance. Organic mulches are added, crop species diversification in the system, and good practices and production management. The conservation agriculture is practiced worldwide with an acreage of 125 million hectares in all continents. Going to the main reasons for the adoption of conservation agriculture, we can have better farm economy, flexible technical possibilities for sowing, fertilization, and all cultural practices. It's much easier. Also, the yield increases and stability of the yield throughout the years. Soil protection, greater nutrient efficiency, better water use efficiency. Moving to the second session with the title Towards Global Food Security, the 21st Century's Challenge. Professor Norman Borlaug identified 2 tasks to achieve the global food security: is to produce sufficient quantities of food with an economic and environmental manner, and to the equitable distribution of food among humans. Poverty impedes equitable food distribution. There is 1 billion humans get less than minimum requirements of energy, protein, fat, and other nutrients throughout the world. Moving on to biotech crops, a lot has been discussed, and the benefits of these crops was mentioned in regards of the resistance to biotic and abiotic resistance, abiotic stresses, profitability and competitiveness of farmers using them. They will need less resources that negatively impact the environment, like pesticides, nitrogen fertilizers, the erosion caused by tillage, reducing the green gases emissions. Also, biotech crops help in rural development. The challenge that we meet, that it's estimated that the world population will reach more than 9 billion humans in the year 2050. This will go up to 10 billion more than 10 billion in the year 2100. Conventional crop improvement methods alone will not be able to double the crop production by 2050. Biotechnology is essential to help in achieving this goal. We always should remember that successful strategies must have multiple approaches to achieve the increase in the food production. Biotech crop status throughout the world. They are planted in 395 million acres. This is in 2011. This acreage is divided almost 50% in developing world and 50% in developed world. Farmers, 16.7 million farmers benefit from these biotech crops in 29 countries. Global adoption rates of biotech crops in producing several food crops or species. 82% of cotton are biotech crops, 75% in soybean, 32% in maize, and 26% in canola. So the percentage is increasing within each of these crops. Moving to arid land agriculture, the mitigation and adaptation. How can we farm the arid lands? We should have good choice and planting time of acceptable crops, good quality water for irrigation. We need to irrigate at the correct time and the correct amount to leach salts outside the soil. We need to have a good balance of water supply and demand over time. Drainage to prevent the rise of water table. Also, new sciences should be used in planting arid lands. We need to use remote sensing, GIS, GPS, biotechnology, simulation modeling, advanced artificial intelligence, renewable energy, solar, wind, biofuel, new energy-saving technologies for desalination of water and water transportation, and nanotechnologies. All new technologies should be used in farming arid land. Modern crops genetic improvement. We need to make our new collections of species and genetic resources, and to work on molecular characterization of plant genetic resources, association mapping of the core collections, using new technologies like tilling, using microarrays, using quantitative PCR, using genomics, genetic engineering of drought-tolerant crops, and Dr. Magdi Matkur presented the HVA1 wheat and how it can require less water where it's required when it was irrigated twice, it gave the same yield of the wild-type cultivar that was irrigated 8 times. So it is 2 times of irrigation versus 8. This is quarter of the amount of water needed to produce the crop, and we get the same yield. And the good news was announced that the BT brinjal will be commercialized within 1 year from today. Moving on to the World Seed Banks, future threats and challenges. World Seed Banks, they store our genetic material and they are make them available for humans in cases of crisis, in cases of research, in whatever. They make them available. They store them for us in these seed banks. There is the Millennium Seed Bank project in London, and they seek to collect samples from every plant. There is the Doomsday Seed Bank in Norway, and the International Rice Research Institute in Philippines, the Center of Improvement of Maize and Wheat in Mexico, and the Potato Center in Peru. All these centers and others act like depositories of seeds and seed banks. Seed banks conserving genetic biodiversity. We are all aware of the climate change and how this affects agricultural production. The more and more we see of the climate change, we recognize how much damage is caused to our agricultural production. The current varieties are not that suitable for the agricultural production under the climate change. We need to start working on improving and making new varieties that can tolerate the harsh conditions that we can see in climate change. In the year 2010, the Nagoya Protocol was signed, and it will make it easy for sharing of genetic material. Genetic biodiversity stored in these seed banks is a treasure for breeders who want to improve the crops. Dr. Norman Uphoff presented his perspective of conserving biodiversity through ex situ biodiversity, not to put the seeds in seed banks. We need to plant the seeds. His interest showed in the new or the old varieties, the native varieties, the original varieties. They are considered important to be planted. For instance, the native rice cultivars that he presented today, it was proven that they have healthier and tastier value. Also, they have been used by some companies like the Lotus companies in the US, where they are sold these native rices or the old cultivars, and they have very strong market for them. Also, what was emphasized is the exchange of genetic resources to adapt to climate change. Climate change has big threat today. We can see that it causes the eradication of genetic resources and also causes the implosion of ecosystem. We're losing our genetic resources. Moving to the fourth panel, the art of manipulating genes. During this session, marker-assisted selection was presented, and a new technology, the DART marker, was presented. The DART marker depends on a genomic fragment whose presence or sequence is polymorphic in a genomic representation. Using it, it was explained how it can be assisted in using in marker-assisted selection. Also, it was mentioned during this session, the European Food Safety Authority's publication, or the EFSA's publication, and they proved to have, there is no hazards that can result from consuming biotech crops. This is results of replicated scientific experiments. Dr. Ingo Potrikis advised the audience not to be misled by biotech arguments that occur now in Europe. Also, Egypt and developing countries must use the most advanced available technologies to improve agriculture and food production. Thank you for your patience.
Reporting on environment stream, the Vice Dean, Institute of Graduate Studies and Research, University of Alexandria. Please welcome Dr. Ahmed Atay.
I think this is a hard task environment because it's a lot of topics presented during 4 sessions. The panel C1, genomic, metagenomics, and microbiome new life science for a new millennium. Genomics, this session demonstrated the experimental and computational tools used for understanding nature by understanding genomic and metagenomics sequences. This session included specific examples for the Earth's microbiome project, the Red Sea metagenomic survey, and different computational bioinformatics applications for understanding life on Earth. Dr. Rami Aziz presented an introduction about microbiology, the distribution of microbiomes in the environment. The number of prokaryotes is 10 to the power 30. We can imagine how the number is, and most have not been cultured. He raised a question, is there a classical way to study biodiversity? The answer is metagenomic is the answer. Metagenomics is the revolution at microscope. He also talked about gene without border, mobile DNA in metagenomes, virus nature's most abundant gene. Jack Gilbert, he said that we are in the golden age of microbiology. They started with human microbiome project, then the Earth's microbiome project. He briefly mentioned the steps from the marine extraction till metagenomic. The Earth's microbiome project, 120 members participated in this project, 50 institutes and 25 countries participate in this project. The aim is to get a global pattern of Earth's bacteria distribution and function. I will skip sometimes because it's a lot of. Hamza Duri, the Red Sea Microbiome Project Biotechnological Prospects of Marine Metagenomica. The aim is to establish a public Red Sea metagenomic database. Depletion of oxygen by depths from 100 to 200 meters, and several indicators for the environment can be detected by nitrate reductase showing up at the time oxygen depletion and could be as environmental marker. PASDAF talk about challenges to analyze and modeling microbial communities. Metagenomics of the human intestinal tract, 760 stool metagenomes, gene catalogs, 8.1 million genes, metagenomic species, 7,000 co-variety sets, include 700 draft bacterial genome. PASDAF challenge to analyze and modeling microbial communities. Question must be answered. Which species are there? What can they do? And how do they interact with each other? How do they interact with human hosts? A global network of coexisting microbes from environmental and whole genome sequence data must be done. Hamza Duri, the Red Sea Microbiome Project, Biotechnological Prospects of Marine Metagenomics. The aim of this project is to establish public Red Sea metagenomic database. Moving to panel 2, sustainable the environment, rights, and responsibilities. Experts in this environmental development and sustainability presented their views on how to best preserve life. Sustaining the environment, rights, and responsibilities, water, water, water. This presented by Margaret Carlson. Egypt's unique water situation. Per person availability shown sharply down. Water unique distribution time per space. For example, ocean, 97.5% of the total water, and fresh water is only 2.5%. Rising food consumption concern. It takes a liter of water to produce every calorie on average. And thus we can imagine how much water we need for food demand could be doubled over the next 50 years because of population. Carlos Amman, biodiversity, talk about diversity. Insect side effects were much bigger than those of PT's crops. Transgenics has less impact on the transcriptome of wheat grain than conventional breeding. Honey Norashi, desert can deliver 90% of energy demand. And this is a great challenge for Middle East and North and South Europe. Soil moisture and energy conservation through conservation of agriculture. This issue is how to meet the demand. Balance between meet the demand and the resources is a challenge. Conservation of agriculture major practice worldwide. Minimum soil disturbance, zero tillage, stubble retention, mini rotation for legume oil seeds. It would be benefit for soil structure. Turfauzi, soil moisture and energy conservation through conservation agriculture benefit. Sowing in time, fuel, machinery were efficient. Better soil structure, better soil moisture conservation, improved traffic ability, timely sowing, higher yield potential, less soil erosion. He also emphasized the experience of using machinery in Iraq and Syria for conserving agriculture. Moving to panel 3, education for sustainable development beyond the campus, EduCamp. Education for sustainable development, the specific object of this project are establishing 7 centers of excellence inside the Egyptian universities to offer educational sustainable development service, developing ESD teaching kit for basic education, developing innovative ESD teaching methodology for school children, developing and implementing a training of trainees program for school teachers, and constructing a virtual environmental for sharing knowledge on ESD. Moving to panel 4, co-organized with World Academy program on climate stability, governance, Prof. Walter True. EduCamp, Education for Sustainable Development Beyond the Campus. It focuses on water education, renewable energy, biodiversity, and agriculture. Also, it's reviewing the education kit, reviewing the Egyptian school curricula, developing ESG kits, developing a TOT training of trainees program for teachers, establishing 7 teacher training centers. The school curriculum is subject-oriented. The student enter and practice-based approaches are difficult to implement. Teachers need training about ESG content and methodology. This is the challenge and obstacle. Moving to the activities of this project: developing water kit, developing agriculture kit, developing biodiversity kit, and energy kit, discussing goal and approach and dealing with differences, requirements for it. Innovative teaching methodology. Innovating the object, developing innovating ESD teaching methodologies, student-centered, and attempt to move away from the traditional didactic teacher-centered approach. 3 types of teaching and learning methodology: inquiry-based learning, community-based learning, and value-based learning. Challenging: development of kit and activities must go hand in hand. Developing activities that can be used with large members also required minimum resource. Training of trainees model also. ESD should encourage learners to ask critical, reflective questions, clarify value, innovation, more positive feature, think systematically, respond through applied learning. Moving to another topic: can information about climatic change inspire and motivate effective action? With the question of does information lead to action, we have to face the wall of identity by passing the bridge of emotion, which is based on the knowledge of capacities. By transformative learning is embedded learning. Transformative learning makes knowledge achievable. For transformative learning can play a major role in developing and implementing policy. One of the challenge is how forms of self-inflict blindness in Anthropocene era. Denial is a defense used to suppress awareness of reality that generates anxiety. Denial is the most for refusing to learning the facts, distorting information, lying to friends and family and others. Also, at the end, Dr. Salah Suleiman addressed with a question of who denies the climatic change, leading us to fact that neither the public deny this fact, they feel, nor the scientists deny the fact. They know only politics do. We live in the global era, climatic change, land usage change, biodiversity loss. Thank you.
The last but not least, reporting on the satellite tracks, the editor from Nature Middle East. Join me to welcome our youngest rapporteur, Mohammed Yahya.
Right, thank you. I will have to go really fast because we don't have much time. We had 6 extremely exciting track sessions going out throughout the 4 days. So let me take you through each of them really quickly. The first one we had was the launch of the EU-Egypt Year of Science and Innovation. And this is not the first year of science that we've had in Egypt. We've had several of those before, but they were with specific countries. So we've had one with Germany, one with France and Spain. But this year, by having it with the whole of the EU, this gives Egypt a chance to work with member states that it had not worked with in the past. And this is really exciting because there are smaller states that can offer a lot, and there's a lot of chances for cooperation, which would not have been possible before that. Egypt has been a part of the Framework Program 7 for a while, and it is actually the largest recipient of funding from the FP7 in North Africa. But when you compare it to the number of researchers in Egypt, it's not really impressive. There's a lot more ground to expand on that. There's a lot of more options, and hopefully through the next iteration of FP7, which would be Horizon 2020, that will have changed by then. The whole idea, the whole shift that the RDI, which is the Research Development and Innovation Program, is trying to do is they want to move it from a pattern of funding where Egypt is mainly a recipient of funding from the EU into collaboration, into a collaborative partner. So they wanted to work it as a partnership rather than as funding coming from the north to the south, which would be quite interesting. The next track we had, which was quite exciting, it was concerning food and food security in the future. And by the year 2050, we will need to be producing 100% more food than we are right now. So to meet this target, we would need to quadruple our meat production, which is impossible. And if it was possible, it is probably not the healthiest choice we have. So to meet this choice, more than 70% of our current food will have to come from efficiency-improving technologies. Technologies that we might not have right now, but they will need to be researched. Especially that across the world, more than 30% of the food produced is actually going to waste. So the world is facing problems of malnutrition and overnutrition, depending on where you're looking exactly. And this has put quite a stress of obesity-related diseases like diabetes, and Egypt actually ranks 9th across the world in obesity right now. So to provide healthy food, the session suggests 3 main topics that would have to be tackled. The first is promote healthy eating and provide healthy environments to live in, which is quite tricky here, and provide the political leadership to enhance health in the country. So yes, it's a huge challenge, and this is why there is definitely a need for more collaborative research across the region. This does not affect one part of the world. Everyone is affected by this, and everyone will need to work together because those technologies will have to be in place pretty soon if we are to meet that target. The final part of this session, which was especially exciting to our younger researchers in the conference, was when Dr. Ahmed Aziz, who is an Egyptian, he was talking about his experience as a young researcher traveling to Germany to pursue a science career. His carry-home message, which I personally found quite exciting, was if you want to be an international researcher, you have to think international. You have to think collaboration. You cannot limit yourself anymore. Our third track session, which I personally found very close to heart because it was talking about the transformative powers of the internet and how it can improve livelihoods and create opportunities. And this is a topic that I personally find very, very dear because standing in Egypt right now, this is exactly how a lot of us young people view the internet. It has completely changed our life, it has improved it, and so we hope, and it has created massive opportunities for everyone. So just to really go through this, the internet has done three main changes. The first change involves innovation. It has democratized innovation. In the past, innovation was limited to an elite selected few. But through the internet, it completely breaks that barrier. There's no one who holds that power anymore. Through the internet, everyone can be a receiver and a producer as well. And actually, as Hiba, who was giving the session, suggests, you should be a contributor to the internet. It is just not healthy anymore to be merely a recipient of information. You have to be producing your own information as well. You have to be innovative. The second thing that the internet has completely revolutionized was community, or our concept of community. Community is not based on geographical locations anymore. We cannot say we're a community because we live in the same areas. The concept of communities has changed, and now people are being united by thoughts, by ideas, and that is boundaryless. You can unite with someone who lives thousands of miles away just based on the ideas that you share. Borderless and completely free. So it completely changes how humans have related to each other in the past. And the third part is in development, and the internet is increasingly playing an important role in development across the world. As people come together and interact and eventually work together, the internet opens up new paths into development. A good example of that is the third sector, which is neither private sector or a public sector. It's not aiming for profit, it is mainly aiming for development. And through the internet, the third sector was able to connect different entities together, like, for example, NGOs and techies, or geeks, as we might call them at in this age, who are people who are very well-versed in the internet. And by connecting them together, they were able to solve problems that just would have not been possible before. There's no way you can bring those people together and develop this way. The second part of this session touched on something completely different, although it's a theme that has been moving, I'd say, threading throughout the whole conference, which is how much are we prepared for a post-human, machine-intensive future? So this looked at the philosophical side of that. There was much talks, like I said, about robotics throughout the conference, and our acceptance of that future. So already this is happening right now. Already we are projecting parts of ourselves as humans, of our conscience, onto computers by going on the internet and posting our thoughts. And we are receiving parts of a machine as well every time we are using a cloud service or the internet. So, and faster and broadband interfaces between the human brain and computers will only serve to make this link more permanent and more effective. Biotechnology could possibly reshape, reformulate our understanding of life, of death, and ultimately of ourselves and our place in the universe. So these developments raise several ethical issues, as you might expect, and challenges many religious and philosophical beliefs of our position in the universe. And this was exactly what Dr. Guna Telakem discussed, how Buddhism approaches this particular belief. And Buddhism is built on the idea that reality is not constant. It's constantly being constructed, deconstructed, and reconstructed again. So in a Buddhist approach to a future where machines are infused with humans, it is only part of a new reality that is being constructed. The fourth track was also on the brain, and it was looking at the enigma of the brain. What do we know of the brain? How do we understand it? Mainly, it was looking at aging and age-related problems, and can we stop or maybe at least slow down these changes that are taking place? We understand the brain on a molecular level, and we understand it on a behavioral level. The problem comes when you try to put those together and see how they work together. We have no idea. That's what makes the search for a cure for brain-related disease, for aging-related diseases, quite futile. When you're looking for a cure for Alzheimer, for example, you're completely blind. You're looking for anything abnormal and approaching that, but you don't know if that's the right approach or not. And that was where the Human Brain Project comes in. What they are trying to create through that is a prospective, predictive model of how the brain works completely, down to every single detail. The proof of concept is already there and of how it would work, but scientists are not clear on how to move forward with that yet. But the end result of that will be a complete understanding of how everything in the brain links up together and works, and eventually allowing a person to use their brain to move a virtual avatar completely out of their body. And that knowledge can then be used and applied to computer engineering or medical research or even in robotics again. And the second part was about aging. How do we age? How does the brain in particular age? We have this saying that goes that the older you get, the wiser you get. But this might not exactly be true, because the older you get, the brain shrinks. So there's a loss of brain functions, if you would say so. 5% of people over 65 will be diagnosed with one form of this deterioration. Maybe the first things that start being affected are the vision and hearing centers of the brain, but then everything else gets affected. Cognitive functions start going down, perspective memory starts going down. But what's interesting is that researchers have found a clear link between aging and the loss of cognitive functions and physical activity. So the more active you are, the better your age. So if you want to stay young, or at least want your brain to stay young, then they suggest that you should be doing physical exercise at least once a day, and a cognitive exercise, like say a crossword puzzle, at least once a day as well. But once we understand how the brain works, once we understand how it goes around, then we can actually maybe slow down that degeneration enough where we can wipe out Alzheimer, because it would not step in until maybe you're 100 or over 100 years old. Let me go through the last two tracks really quickly, because I think I'm running out of time. Yes, I am. The fifth track was about the Atlas of Islamic World Science and Innovation Project, which is basically it's a project that is mapping all science activity across the Islamic world. And it's taking case studies from certain countries, which are Malaysia, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Senegal. There are many partners who are stakeholders in this project, including Bibliotheca Alexandrina here, and the Royal Society in London. And the Egypt case study was supposed to launch during the conference, but unfortunately it was delayed due to the large number of partners. But there were some really interesting findings from the report. Most researchers in Egypt found that the main problem, or suggest that the main problem they are facing is with funding. It's a lack of funding. And research funding in Egypt has been lingering for the past 30 years or so at 0.2% of GDP. It boils down to very little for each researcher who is pursuing research here. While Egypt has a huge number of students, more than any other North African country. The second problem that was highlighted in the Atlas was the type of education the students are getting. It's mainly based on memorization, rote learning, and it does not encourage enough critical or analytical thinking. And faculty positions were also very rigid. It was seen that once you are in a faculty position, that was for life. There was no faculty exchange between different faculties, or let alone different universities as well. However, there were some positive notes, and that was mainly in collaboration. Egypt ranks very well in collaborative research, only surpassed by Jordan. Finally, it was today's session, track 6, which covered the whole day, and it was looking at the link between business and science. And obviously, the economic situation of the world right now makes it important to rethink our approach to funding for science. Venture capital funding is, unlike what many people believe, not really reaping that many rewards. There's an elite few who are making money out of it, but most people are losing money. So this model might need to change. And the whole model of research and development might need to be rebuilt from the ground. And while there are no definitive future plans for that yet, the session suggests it will involve a lot of open innovation, and again, it will be driven by collaborative research. Funds will need to be allocated very consciously and very carefully in the past. Every dollar spent somewhere will have to be decided what kind of, what are you getting back for that? What do you expect back from that? And there should be, public funding will have to be involved some way in the basic research at least. Finally, and this is my last slide, the second and third sessions today, they were looking at examples of how marketing science can benefit the community. And one interesting example came from Uruguay and the use of GMOs in farming, which has completely transformed the country. It was a very positive experience. And one interesting side effect of that is that people started to recognize that companies who are investing in science, who are doing science, were becoming more profitable, and that made them link science with profit, and that made them think of science as a positive thing. They were actually interested in science. The session goes on to discuss that in the future, marketing skills will be very important for all researchers, and everyone, they will have to play a role in every PhD course or even for undergrads as well. And scientists need to understand the market. They need to know the needs of the market. They cannot just be doing blind research. Of course, there's always going to be a need for basic research, but you have to understand your market as well. Finally, there was a discussion of sustainable development and how, at the end of the day, businesses will have to look sometime beyond mere profit. That touched on the concept of corporate social responsibilities and what kind of give back are these industries and businesses supposed to give to their communities, either through environmental preservation or human rights or by improving labor issues. It has its disadvantages, of course. It's lost money, lost profit for those companies, but there was a discussion of how can you encourage these companies to get involved in that. The takeaway message of that was that as humans, we need to move out of self-focus and see self-realization through our interactions with others. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mohammed, for very delicious reporting, if I should say. And I think you agree with me that our 5 reporters, they deserve another applause. Don't you see that? The closing session exercise. Well, some of you owe the library tens of pounds, right? And a couple of mobiles, because we heard some mobiles twice. Anyway, as every time, I'll go with you just a few statistics about this conference. These are our official partners and the sponsors. If you could see the number behind there, this is the number of sponsors, 12. If you have good, sharp eyes. And the exhibitors and the institutional supporters. I should mention here that some of our speakers, they paid for their tickets from their own buckets. Without naming them, we have to applaud them separately. About the program, we had 28 sessions between panels, plenaries, and roundtables, and the 6 satellite tracks. Muhammad Yahya just reported on them. Now, I should say this in Arabic. Man antum? Who are you? This is no politics, right? No politics. The participants, we exceeded the 2,000 line this time. Maybe some of you will say, no, I haven't seen 2,000 around. Actually, you're here, other lecture halls and the biofair and the session, the poster sessions. But some of participants, they paid the fees but didn't show. About 10% didn't show. I think this is because of some exams are earlier than usual. So 84% are fresh graduates, undergraduates, and postgraduate students. 15% are faculty members. Faculty members paid fees. And 1% others. For the participants, as usual, I told you last time, you remember, they are coming. Be careful, men, right? Be careful. For participants, the 97 are Egyptians and 3% non-Egyptians. You have to work on this. Now for speakers, we have 115 speakers from almost 30 countries from the 4 corners of the world. Speakers, men win here, right? But as I said last time, they are still coming, right? Be careful. I have some comparison between 2004 conference till today, which are the 5 times. Sometimes we say this is the 6th edition or 5th edition because the first real biotechnology conference was 2002. It was named then Biotechnology Egypt. Then we're not in cooperation with BioVision Lyon yet. So it's goes both ways. Participants started with 2004 was just 900, actually 900 unpaid participants, because then we were not charging anyone any money. But when you are charged, you come. Actually, it's free. Is not working with Egyptians. Sorry to say that, but we reached almost more than 2 times the beginning of our number. For the speakers, they are a little less than before, and this is because we have squeezed a little bit the program, and instead of having 4 speakers per session, we worked on 3 speakers per session. And I think also what is going on in the country because of the revolution has some effect there too. The Nobel laureates, we had between 3 and 5 every time. This is the 2004, 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012. And this time, for the first time, we had video messages from 2 Nobel laureates and live conference, video conferencing. Now, the closing keynote address. And here I will not say any more, except that I ask you to join me to welcome our biovisionary, biovisionist, our boss and everything, Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin.
Thank you, Muhammad Faham. Thank you all for being here. Long and arduous journey. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the conclusion of our deliberations, and you have heard from the rapporteurs the highlights of the many sessions we have had the privilege of attending and the many excellent papers and the insightful speakers we have had the pleasure of listening to. I will ask your indulgence in the final occasion to share with you some ideas that I hope you will take home from this conference. And as I extend special thanks to our speakers and to all of you, our participants, I would also like to give special thanks to a few particular individuals who I believe deserve our recognition. We have to recognize those who labored long and hard to make this conference possible, and in particular, whether it is from security to audiovisual, from travel to transport, from building maintenance to flower arrangements, from ICT to our interpreters, from secretariat to publications to media. I think many people have worked very hard and all deserve our recognition, but in particular, there is a small team that was dedicated for this conference. Many of them are volunteers and friends of the library, and some are staff, and I see them over here. So I think please stand up, all of you, and be recognized for your labors. And having said that, however, and as usual, they are going to argue with me, but I think you will all agree with me that there are two individuals who deserve even more special attention, and that is Marwa al-Wakil and Muhammad Faham. Thank you all for sharing with me, because I would not have felt satisfied had we not been able to at least express collectively our debt to all those who made this possible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I started this conference with a presentation about the changing structure and content of knowledge. And I even quoted T.S. Eliot, who asked a century ago, where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? And so, as we come to the end of this conference, I would like to pick up that theme and quote another poet, a lady, Edna St. Vincent Millay, who also about a century ago said, "Upon this gifted age in its dark hour, falls from the sky a meteoric shower of facts. They lie unquestioned, uncombined. Wisdom enough to leach us of our ill is daily spun, but there exists no loom to weave it into fabric." I believe the science is the loom that weaves all of this into a viable fabric. And so, allow me in these concluding remarks to address 5 points. First, the nature of the quest of science today. Second, the frightening divide between the two cultures of the natural and social sciences. Third, the conditions that we need for a great leap as we go forward into the next stage of our existence. Fourth, the ethics that must govern the relationship between science and the public interest. And fifth, how we're going forward. So on the role of science, of course, along with Bronowski, one of the people I admire a lot, I believe that science is the harnessing of knowledge so that we can command a greater return from nature, from the forces of nature. We understand them better. And from a very long time ago, possibly from Thales and maybe even before, and all the way through the ancient Library of Alexandria, that has been the quest of science. Precision, measurement, understanding. astronomy and mathematics flourished right here in the Library of Alexandria. Many of you may not know this, but not only did we have the first human being anywhere in the world who actually said that the earth revolves around the sun was Aristarchus of Samos right here in the Library of Alexandria. The proof of the earth being spherical and the calculation of the circumference of the earth by Eratosthenes, the third director of the ancient library. And as a visiting professor in the ancient library, we had no less than Archimedes himself being here. Regretfully, the vision of Aristarchus that the sun was at the center of the heavens, the heliocentric cosmology, was abandoned to another great astronomer, Claudius Ptolemy, 180 AD, also here in the Library of Alexandria, who produced the Ptolemaic system, which was to govern world understanding for 1,000 years or more, actually closer to 1,400 years. And it was only after the revolution of Copernicus and Kepler and others that the heliocentric system returned. Even though in the midst of that, the Arabs and Muslims had made major contributions to our understanding of mathematics and astronomy. Why did it take so long to return to the original thoughts of Aristarchus when he said the earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around? Well, for one thing, it is not that people were just stubborn, it's that the conclusions weren't obvious. I mean, if you look and you live on the earth and you observe that the sun gets out, goes, lands on the other side, so you sort of naturally assume the sun goes around. Secondly, there was a very strong presumption that the earth is at the center of everything for the simple reason of gravity. Anything you drop seems to fall to earth. It seems to attract everything. There is nothing that when you put it down suddenly flies out to the sun, so why should the sun be the center of the cosmology? So what I mean to say that contrary to what people read today about how these debates were profoundly religious debates against scientific debates, even though in certain times, yes, church took positions on some of these issues, but fundamentally they were arguments between scientists about evidence and the accuracy of measurement. And it was not just that the works of Tusin ibn Shatar and so on were picked up later on by Copernicus, it was also that we needed the elliptical view of Kepler, and only when Newton provided the force of gravity did we have a new cosmology that ultimately swept everything before it. And that is how science has advanced through all these centuries. That's how science was built here in the ancient library, and that's what we hope we will reassert in the new Library of Alexandria. And science is based, as you all know, on a scientific method, on the empirical method. I discussed in my opening speech Ibn al-Haytham, who 6 centuries before Bacon and Descartes and Galileo actually presented this empirical method. And that method was adopted with marvelous results when the torch of knowledge passed on to Europe from the 16th century or 17th century onward. But surprisingly, these people were not referred to as scientists, even though the word science existed. They were referred to as natural philosophers, for it was seen as a form of philosophy. After all, one of the greatest minds of all time, Aristotle, was considered a philosopher. And the word scientist, should be interested to know, is quite new in the English language. It entered the language in 1840, almost the middle of the 19th century, when the polymath William Whewell, a brilliant philosopher mathematician, said that we need very much a name to describe a cultivator of science. I should incline to call him a scientist, 1840. And that's when the word scientist came into the language. Even more surprisingly, for many people, R&D, research and development, enters the language only in 1923. It's not even a century old. That was when this emerging community of cultivators of science in general, for whom the 20th century would create great institutions in terms of labs and universities, the language entered when the partnership with private business emerged, and private business invested in scientific research in a big way, and it became R&D. And that has been a partnership that has brought about incredibly rapid change everywhere on the planet. We have had enormous achievements in one lifetime. Science, technology, and innovation, STI as we call it, has taken us from no machine flight in 1903 to landing on the moon in 1969. 66 years, one lifetime. The power of computers, as you all know, has increased by many orders of magnitude. We are manipulating the very building blocks of life, which is one of the topics we talked about here at length in this conference. We probe the innermost recesses of the atom, and we explore the farthest reaches of the cosmos. And in all this quest, this amazing quest, as Bruce Alberts reminded the young people when he showed all the areas that remain to be explored, this is nothing new, for great scientists have known this at all times. The more we discover, the less we know. And Newton, the great Newton, after he wrote his magnificent magisterial Principia Mathematica, he said to those who told him that he saw everything, first he said, I've seen farther because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. But more importantly, he said, I was like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then by finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. So, what are we doing when we look to where we are today? Today, science is a quest. It is a quest where every time you answer something, you raise new questions. It is a quest where achievements are better measured, not in the finality of the answers, but in the fertility of the questions that they raise. So let us all enjoy the quest together. But as our world becomes ever more complex and our abilities become ever more powerful, we need more than the powerful arsenal of the natural sciences, the tools of mathematics, and the acumen of the computing and information sciences. We will need the wisdom of the humanities and the insights of the social sciences. So we must bring the social and natural sciences closer together in both theory and practice. And that's now coming to my second point, which I would emphasize. If it exists today as a problem throughout the West and in the world, let me tell you that it is a far greater problem in Egypt, where in our university system, the humanities and the social sciences are almost totally divorced from the natural sciences. Now, those of you who know their history of science will recognize that the great C.P. Snow wrote about the two cultures over half a century ago. He bemoaned a degree of ignorance, even rising enmity between the culture of science and the culture of the humanities. The ignorance of each about the other was noticeable then, but it has grown since then a lot. Today, that non-science culture has mutated into a variety of groups all sharing the same level of ignorance about the basics of science, and some of them are gravitating towards a fundamentally anti-science attitude. Many deny that science is anything more than just another discourse reflecting the power relationship of society, in keeping with what many of my French postmodernist friends like to say. And that its practitioners, the scientists, are no more than another social group vying for resources and power. They politicize debate. They reject evidence. But science is different. We lose sight of that difference at our own peril. In science, there is no individual authority, no book that governs right or wrong, no high priest that interprets any text. There is a method based on rationality and evidence. The method that I read you descriptions from Ibn al-Haytham about, and many others. Science encourages the engagement with the contrarian view, as I cited to you Ibn Nafis and what he said, and hails the overthrow of an existing paradigm and conceptions as breakthroughs. We are proud when somebody destroys what we believe in science, because that is how science advances. Our respect for Newton is not diminished by the fact that Einstein recast the perception of the cosmos, and our respect for Einstein will not be diminished when somebody else explains dark matter and dark energy and maybe comes up with something totally new. We remain open to these contrarian views. We expect and hope that there will be transformations, and when they do happen, we arbitrate differences with evidence. We have a method for settling disputes in science. Recently, you may recall, the media cited that neutrinos had been measured flying from the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva to the Gran Sasso in Italy faster than the speed of light. And everybody started saying Einstein was wrong, the theory of physics is wrong, everything we know is wrong. Media had programs everywhere. But I looked up the actual paper. The scientists who reported that did not make that claim. They were true scientists. They said, we did an experiment, we measured it, we repeated it, the measurement once, twice, 3 times, and we have an anomaly that we cannot explain. And here is our data, and please, colleagues, if somebody can explain why we're getting this result, we'd like to know. Now, of course, inherently, if that result was sustained, then it would have been really a transformation of our understanding, because, as you all know, according to the theory of relativity, no information can fly faster than the speed of light anywhere. Well, it turns out that there were magnetic waves that interfered with the measurement clocks in that experiment. And people are not upset. They accept that this is the way we arbitrate disputes. It's not a matter of insisting on your point of view. That's something unique about science. Now, this is a method based on rationality and evidence, and a method that allows different points of views. It's a method that allows everybody to challenge the existing views. And guess what? Most of those who challenge the views and who change the perceptions are very young. Einstein was 26 when he published his revolutionary papers in 1905. Watson was 25 when he co-wrote that little paper with Francis Crick about the structure of DNA. All hailed for their discoveries, and they are in the pantheon of the great scientists. But powerful as the empirical method is, it is not enough to deal with many of our problems, which are not just individual or systemic, but also social and environmental, local and global. And here we need the insights of the social sciences and the wisdom of the humanities. We need to bridge the two cultures as never before. Now, the methods of the mainstream social sciences may differ from those of the natural sciences, but their scholarship is not in doubt. Usually more qualitative than quantitative, The social sciences tend to description rather than prescription and avoid generalization across societies, with the obvious exception of cross-sectional economic studies. There's been a long-standing concern in quantification in the social sciences from the time of Laplace and Quetelet to Walter Isard. But mathematical theories in the social sciences are few. They frequently use narrative, they use analytical constructs that are different, but that doesn't mean that their insights are any less important. At present, many of the problems of our time, from gender to medical issues, from the deployment of technology to environment, from social cohesion to international peace, they focus attention on human individuals and societies as much as on the natural world in which we live. Now, human beings are social beings, living things that have motives, intentions, norms, and values, whose social institutions have meaning, symbols, rituals, and cultures. All of that is not directly measurable, but has to be inferred from observation. And these are precisely the contributions of the social scientists. And so, for the benefit of humanity in this new century, we must bridge this rift between the two cultures. We must be able to bring their different and complementary insights to bear on the great problems of our time. Now, the third part is, or the third theme, is what sort of climate do we need to create for that next great leap for humanity? We are living in the dawn of the age of biology. We're still at the very beginning of it. And the new revolutionary transformations in our understanding and our capabilities are opening vistas and raising challenges as never before. This new biological revolution will bring marvels in production and allow us to produce in ways that do not consume or pollute at anything like the levels of the past. But it will also bring speedy and accelerating change in the global scene. And the future will belong to those who are educated, the nimble, and the powerful, to those learning societies and nations that have the capacity to acquire, process, and use knowledge more swiftly, and then be in a position to contribute that knowledge so they can access knowledge and become part of that global network of knowledge producers and consumers that the world is rapidly becoming. In our own time, the issues are becoming more complex. For the first time, the new technologies and the new breakthroughs are enabling us to fathom the very composition of matter. As I said, to tinker with the building blocks of life. We are, as we saw in this conference, for the first time communicating by thought, nervous system to nervous system. We are creating robots that have unheard of levels of autonomy before that. We are sending probes to other planets and impacting on our own climate with potentially disastrous results. A huge explosion in humanity's presence on the planet, our footprint on the planet, has meant that we have appropriated ever more of the habitats of other species with important reductions in biodiversity. The pollution that our agricultural and industrial processes engender is testing the limits of nature's ability to recycle them. Never before has the ability to change the world for the better been more present. And yet, never before have the risks of human action and human inaction been greater. So we must harness this scientific revolution for the benign development of the planet for humanity and other species, as opposed to the rapacious misuse of technology for short-term consumption. We need a new ethics of science and technology. And that brings me to my fourth and penultimate point, which is how to link science with the public interest. Because the pace of scientific discovery has never been greater, and it is accelerating at a very, very fast pace, it's important that the practice of scientific research be governed by certain values and ethical constructs. Not everything that is technically feasible is ethically desirable. Such concerns run in an unbroken line from the times of the Nazi medical experiments on human beings all the way to animal rights movements in our time. It reminds us of the need to have sensible ways of governing the essential, desirable, and unstoppable pursuit of knowledge. Now, here are a few basic parameters that I think we need to recognize. First, we should be clear about the boundaries between the private sector and the public good. By definition, in economic terms, public goods that are non-excludable and non-rival require public investment and should be undertaken in the name of the public interest, because we cannot expect that the private sector will do it on their own. Now, these are important considerations when we come to the issues of intellectual property rights regimes, but those who speak exclusively of market forces forget that Adam Smith, he of the invisible hand, the famous invisible hand, also wrote in The Wealth of Nations that the state is responsible for erecting and maintaining those public institutions and those public works which, though they may be in the highest degree advantageous to a great society, are, however, of such a nature that the profit could never repay the expense to any individual or small number of individuals, and therefore we cannot expect that any individual or such small number of individuals should erect or maintain. So he recognized the public good and the responsibility of the state, supporting universities, supporting basic research, supporting public goods development and research. That is a fundamental thing that the public must do, and we talked about public-private partnerships many times in this conference. Second, the codes of conduct for research should be developed by those with a profound understanding of the scientific issues in conjunction with the representatives of society at large. I mean, people who design the regulations have to understand the science. It cannot be imposed from outside, ignoring the evidence before us. A prime example of successful codes of conduct, as we mentioned on other occasions here in this conference, were the Asilomar Conference of the early 70s that established the accepted norms of the conduct of recombinant DNA research, and which led to the absence of accidents in the last 4 decades. Third, the development of a regime to conduct scientific research should address a multiplicity of issues, not just one or another issue. Thus, public safety, moral repugnance, risk, uncertainty are all elements that enter into the debate. And here it's going to be very important to disentangle the issues and involve the right cast of characters in each debate, and then bring them together again for a coherent and balanced consensus of the majority, recognizing that there will never be a unanimity, 100% agreement on the kind of issues that are raised by today's scientific research. Fourth, we must avoid one size fits all. The need of the different branches of science are enormously varied, as are the types of issues that they raise. Thus, an open discussion of each set of issues and a flexible approach are needed. And fifth, an ongoing review of the new evidence is needed to constantly reassess the decisions of the past. It's not that we've had this regulation and therefore it's going to be good forever. No, we need to see what we are doing. For example, some things that were thought to be benign, we saw their long-term effects differently. For example, the impact on Madame Curie's exposure to radioactivity. And that was just one example. In other cases, certain fears that people had proved to be unfounded, such as the fear that a chain reaction would be generated and scientists wouldn't be able to control it. Or, more recently, as some people raised the fears that the Large Hadron Collider in CERN was going to create a black hole here on Earth and do all sorts of things. So we need to review that. And again, as scientists, we must arbitrate with evidence and rationality. Now, regulating technology is slightly different, because here it's not just the regulation of the research, here is the issue of how do you apply the science. And the vision, for me, of the late Norman Borlaug, who passed away, and Malcolm Elliott here is founded the Borlaug Institute, will tell you that this Nobel Prize-winning scientist who did so much to feed the world understood what we are talking about in linking science to society. And he was always out in the farmers' fields. And his dying words on his deathbed, when somebody was telling him about new breakthroughs, was, "Get it out to the farmers now." So the vision of the partnership between the farmer in her field, with her practical wisdom honed through the centuries, and the scientist in the lab coat working at some of the cutting-edge issues in the laboratory, is a real and viable partnership. They are not worlds apart at all. They are working on how to make that knowledge useful, how to transform science into technology. So we must see science beyond that, not just governed by the scientific values. It is an integral part of our culture. It informs our worldview. It affects our behavior. Science has the capacity to capture the imagination, to move the emotion, and it promotes fundamental ethical values, which I described in my opening address as the values of science. Science is a cultural current that brings imagination and vision to bear on concrete problems and theoretical speculation. After all, in Blake's immortal phrase, "What is now proved was once only imagined." And the imagination and vision are at the very heart of the scientific enterprise, even though to advance we need the empirical evidence and to arbitrate disputes with evidence. The ethics in the application of science are important, and today they have become more important because of the role of intellectual property rights and the legal, environmental, and social issues that they raise. So these issues require that the regimes for the application of regulations to science and technology, from the patent regime to the trade regime of the world, must be, in my judgment, science-based, evidence-based. And it is wrong to have a separation of perspectives because it leads to some indefensible activities. For example, in the United States, the government was leading a war against smoking. At the same time, another part of that government, in international discussions bearing on trade, was arguing that developing countries should lower their taxes to allow the tobacco companies to sell in the name of free trade. Some inconsistencies here. Why? Because there are different parts, one negotiating an economic agreement and other people negotiating something based on public health. And this requires to be brought in. And that leads, of course, to the issue of what do we do about the precautionary principle. It has been much touted, deserves to be used, but as Philippe Kurilski said in his famous report to then Prime Minister Jospin, that it has to be in the form of a comparative evaluation of alternative technologies. Because the issue is not, is there a risk in this new technology versus zero risk? It is there, how much of a risk is there in this new technology against the continuation of the present technology, which has known and measurable risks? So here's the issue. It's not against some abstract measure of zero risk, it is against a situation that exists and where we need improvement. And therefore, what we need is a regulation that is balanced, fair, efficient, and effective. Now, all of these four qualities are not the same, but that is a topic for a lecture on its own or even a conference on its own. But such regulatory regimes, I emphasize again, must be designed by knowledgeable people and have the support of society if they are to achieve their purpose, which cannot be to block the pursuit of scientific endeavor, or we will not be able to effectively meet the needs of 9 billion human beings on this planet without destroying our ecosystems. Now, this requires that science regains its position to provide the scientific evidence around which social debates occur. We cannot have the debates based on some who deny the facts as we know them and others who assert them. People are entitled to their opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. I mean, we have to establish what the facts are and then have a debate on that. Now, that is what the basis of a civil discourse in a pluralistic society is all about. And this requires that the civil society everywhere act not as opponents of science and technology, but as the voice of the global conscience that reminds us the world we need to have the results of science harnessed to the needs of the many, not just the desires of the few. But the burden of this social and global dialogue is large. For today, regretfully, as the world explores the marvels of the genes and breaks down the secrets of the atom and reaches to the stars and calculates the age of the oldest rocks, many are unable to cope and regress, looking with suspicion on the new and trying to erect barriers to limit where the mind may range. So this will require liberating the mind from the fear of the different, the new, and the foreign, and the promotion of the respect of diversity in a shared collectivity. These are values inherent in the scientific outlook, which promotes the bonds that transcend race and culture to reshape culture in the broader, more tolerant framework of humanity. And so, my last point, to go forward. Today, sadly, the collective human leadership and all our societies are unable to meet the first of the Millennium Development Goals which we set ourselves back in 2000, which was to reduce poverty and hunger by half in 15 years. Today, there is no way we're going to meet that target. We're trying to limit the damage. Tens of thousands of people die from hunger-related causes every day, and many of the poor who survive lack access to the fundamental needs of a decent existence. Over 1 billion people are compelled to live on less than $1 a day, and a sixth or more of the human family live in a marginalized existence. But that's not all. The marine fisheries of the world are grossly overexploited. The soils are rapidly eroding in many parts of the world. Water is becoming scarcer as underground aquifers are drawn down. Deforestation is still very much a problem. The global challenge of desertification, climate change, and the potential loss of biodiversity demand redoubled efforts. Agriculture must be transformed to promote sustainable food security for the billions of food insecure in the world. And the urban poverty and environmental challenge posed by the developing world is enormous, as urban populations in the developing countries are going to treble within one generation. Now, therein lies the challenge before us. Will we accept such human degradation as inevitable, or will we strive to help, in Frantz Fanon's evocative phrase, the wretched of the earth? Will we accept that we are no longer responsible for future generations, or will we try to act as true stewards of the earth? Now, science is the key to the future. An ethical outlook to science in this new century is what will allow the full potential of scientific discovery for the benefit of the world to be unleashed. We need this ethical approach to scientific inquiry, and we need more than ever to create a space of freedom for the scientists to explore and for the innovators and entrepreneurs to invent the new. Let us encourage all of that. Let us break down the barriers between nations that deny our common humanity. And while doing all this, let us think of the unborn, remember the forgotten, give hope to the forlorn, reach out to the unreached, and by wise actions today lay the foundations for better tomorrows. And I hope that this conference has contributed to these worthy goals, and that it added to your own knowledge, and that it enabled you to make new friends. And so, with that, I bid you all farewell and good travels, and thank you very much for having honored us here.